Good day, grade 10. We are busy with functions, chapter 6 in your textbook. It's the 13th of July, and today we're going to do the parabola. Okay, so you've never heard this word in your life ever before, so listen carefully to understand this today. The parabola is a quadratic function. As you can remember, we did the linear function, the straight line, and now we are doing the quadratic function. Okay, so the general equation for a quadratic function is y is equal to ax squared plus q. Okay, now we're going to have a number in the place of a and the place of q. So an example of such an equation would be y is equal to 2x squared plus 1. There's a number in the place of a and a number in the place of q. Okay, now what does it look like? These graphs look like smiles or sad mouths. Okay, so goodness, what's going on here? So this would be my y-axis and my x-axis, and that would be what the graph looks like. It looks like a curve like that. Okay. So this a value tells me if it's smiley or sad. If it is a positive a value of a greater than 0, then I will have a smiley graph. If I have a negative a value, I will have a sad graph, and it would look like that. Okay, the q is the y-intercept. Right, so we're going to go step by step in drawing these now. Okay, draw the parabola using the table method. Draw the following graphs: y is equal to x squared, y is equal to 2x squared, and y is equal to negative 3x squared. So let's start with the first one. Okay, we have y is equal to x squared. So let's remember quickly, the general equation or the standard equation is y is equal to ax squared plus q. I have to remember that. It's very, very important to study that. Okay, now in the place of a and the place of q, I have a number. So let's look at our equation at the moment. In the place of a, we have a 1, and in the place of q, we have a 0. So that's why we don't write them. We just have y is equal to x squared. Okay. Now I'm going to make a table. I'm going to choose my own x values as we did for the straight line. I chose the x values negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. Always choose negative and positive values and 0. Okay, so now I'm going to substitute it in. It's very important to substitute in brackets. So I'm going to take negative 2 now and substitute it in. Y is equal to negative 2 squared, and that gives me positive 4. Okay, so the bracket is very important there. And also when you have to use your calculator, just to remember the brackets. Now we are going to calculate all the y values in that way, and then I get the answers 4, 1, 0, 1, and 4. Then I draw my set of axes, my y-axis, x-axis, and I plot at negative 2 and positive 4, negative 1 and 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 4. Then I draw a curve. Please don't make any sharp. You're not allowed to make a sharp edge like that. It's very, very wrong. You have to make a round curve. Okay? And arrows at the ends, because these arrows mean that this graph goes on and on and on and on and on forever. Okay, and it goes wider and wider and wider and higher and higher and higher. Okay, up to infinity. Then I write the equation of my graph, y is equal to x squared, and I always write the coordinates of the intercepts, just like we did with the straight line. For all the graphs, we have to do this. So the coordinate of the intercepts, the intercept is 0, 0. This graph, y is equal to x squared, is the basic parabola graph. It's the most basic one that you can get, and we call it the mother graph. Okay, so that's the mother graph. Now I'm going to teach you about domain and range. Okay, first we are learning about domain. Domain is also a new thing for you, so please listen carefully. Domain means all the x values that are included in the graph, which means all the x values that have a graph. So x values are on the x-axis, right? So let's say when I go on over here, I will get negative infinity eventually. And on the other side, I will get positive infinity. I always say, let's say I was a tiny little man walking on the x-axis. And if I was walking at negative infinity, would I find a graph when I look up? Yes, I would, because remember, this graph goes wider and wider and wider and wider, and I will find a graph at negative infinity. So then I walk and walk and walk on the x-axis, and I just look up all the time and see if I see a graph. Yes, I do see a graph everywhere I walk. I see a graph up to infinity. So actually, all the real numbers have a graph, are included in the graph. So x is an element of real numbers for the domain. Or I can write it like this. X goes from negative infinity to infinity. Okay. You can choose which writing method you would like to use. I like the one that says negative infinity to infinity. Remember, it's round brackets for infinity because infinity is always excluded. Okay, so that was the domain. Now the range. The range is about the y values that are included in the graph. Okay, so the y values, let's look at the y-axis. When I look at the y-axis, I know that at the bottom, if I go on and on and on, I will get negative infinity. And at the top, if I go on and on and on, I will find positive infinity. Okay, now I'm a tiny little man walking on the y-axis and checking if there's a graph. Okay, at negative infinity, I don't have any graph. The parabola doesn't start down here. Nowhere down here I'll find a parabola. But when the little man gets to 0, there I will find a graph. So 0 is definitely included, and then the little man walks up and up and up, and everywhere that he walks, he sees a graph everywhere. And what about here at the top at positive infinity? Yes, he will find a graph at positive infinity because these arms of the parabola go on and on and on and on and on. They go up and up and up. Okay, so it's all the positive real numbers, or another way to write that would be y is from 0 to infinity. Infinity is always excluded. Is 0 included? Yes, 0 is included, so I'm going to make a block bracket because when I'm standing on 0, I have a graph. So 0 is included in the range. So that is what domain and range is. We're going to do 2 more examples, so don't worry about it if you don't understand it right now. After those examples, if you still don't understand it, please don't hesitate to contact your teacher or rewind and listen again. Then the minimum value. So this graph has a minimum value, but it does not have a maximum value. Why do I say it doesn't have a maximum value? Because it goes on up to infinity, and we don't know where infinity is, so there is no maximum value. But the minimum value of this graph is 0, as at y equal to 0. Then the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is a line on which I can fold this graph so that its arms will fit exactly on top of one another. So when I fold this graph there on the pink line, the y-axis, If I fold it there, then these arms will fit exactly onto one another. So this axis of symmetry is the y-axis, and the equation of the y-axis is x is equal to 0. Okay, so I can remember that. Next, I have y is equal to 2x squared. Okay, I draw the table and I get my y values. I choose my own x values. In this case, I chose -1, 0, and 1. Then I plot them at -1, 2, 0, 0, and 1, 2. And I draw a nice curve with arrows at the ends. And I write down the equation, y is equal to 2x squared, and write down the coordinate of the intercepts. Then for the domain, range, minimum value, and axis of symmetry. The domain is all the x values that are included in this graph. So remember, I start at -infinity and end at infinity, and I start walking my little man. So this arm goes on wider and wider and wider forever, and this arm goes on wider and wider and wider forever. So it's going to be all real numbers, or I can say x is an element from -infinity to infinity, both excluded. Okay, so now you will see that all the domains of all the parabolas will be the same, and it will be like this. It will be x is an element from -infinity to infinity, or x is an element of real numbers. Okay, then the range. The range at -infinity, I don't have any graph, but it starts at 0 and it goes up to infinity. So it's all the positive real numbers, or I can write down the y values that are included is from 0 to infinity. Okay, so domain, walk on the x-axis. Range, walk on the y-axis. Easy as that. Now, the minimum value. This graph has a minimum value, and it is at y equal to 0. There is the minimum. And the axis of symmetry is the same. For all the parabolas in grade 10, it will be the same. The axis of symmetry will be x is equal to 0. Or the y-axis. Because when I fold it on that pink line, the arms will fit exactly onto one another. Last example, y is equal to -3x squared. Okay, now I have to remember, this is the A value. And the A value tells me if it's smiley or sad. And clearly I can see here that it is a sad graph because it's negative, remember? Okay, so I'm going to imagine so long that I'm going to have a sad parabola. Now I'm going to substitute in the value of -1. It's very important to substitute in brackets. Let's do it quickly. Y is equal to -3 and in brackets -1 squared. Now I have to remember -1 times -1 is +1 and 1 times -3 is -3. So the answer will be -3. And so I do with 0 and with 1, and then I plot them. I get -1 and -3, 0, 0, and +1 and -3. I draw a smooth curve, no sharp edges, and I draw arrows at the ends to show that it goes on forever. And I write down y is equal to -3x squared. That's the equation that they gave me. And also I have to write down the coordinate of the, the coordinate of the intercept. Okay, then the domain, range, minimum value. Okay, domain. The domain will again be all real numbers. So it will be x is an element from -infinity to infinity. And the range, this is wrong. Goodness, very wrong. The range will be from, goodness guys, this is totally wrong. Let me just fix this quickly. Okay, sorry, so I fixed that. Then the range is from -infinity to 0, because here's -infinity, there I'll have a graph, up to 0. 0 is included. This graph has a maximum value, not a minimum value, because it has a turning point there, and it doesn't have any minimum value because it goes on up to negative infinity. Okay, so the maximum value is at y is equal to 0, and the axis of symmetry is the same. It's the y-axis, or the line x is equal to 0. Okay, now what you're going to do is you're going to do the homework. The homework says sketch the following parabolas, and then for each graph, determine the domain, the range, the maximum or minimum, and the axis of symmetry. So like the same as the examples, you do them. And you press pause now, and when you are ready, you come back so that we can mark it. Alright, welcome back. This is the homework for the 13th of July. Okay, the first one that they gave us was y is equal to negative x squared. So now I have a table that I drew myself. I chose the x values myself, and I substitute them in. Now I'm going to just do the first one quickly. Y is equal to negative 2 squared. So that's negative, and negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. So the answer will be negative 4. And so I do for each of those x values, and I get negative 1, 0, negative 1, and negative 4. Then I draw my set of axes. Remember to draw it the correct size, not too big, not too small. The y-axis should be the units on the y-axis should be 1 unit for every line in your book, and the x-axis should be 1 centimeter apart. Okay, so now I plot them. Negative 2, negative 4, negative 1, negative 1, 0, 0, 1, negative 1, and 2, negative 4. I draw a curve, arrows at the ends, write down the coordinate of the intercept, write down the equation. Then I have to do the domain. The domain means all the x values that are included in the graph. So I go to the x-axis because I'm working with the x values, and I see that it's going to be from negative infinity to infinity. So it's going to be x is an element of real numbers, or the other way to write it is x is an element of negative infinity to infinity. You don't have to write both of those, only one of them. Now for the domain. For the domain, remember, I'm going to the y-axis. I have negative infinity at the bottom, so negative infinity will definitely be included. So it's from negative infinity to 0, and 0 is included. So it's a bracket, a block bracket. Then we have to do the maximum or minimum. First we decide, does this one have a maximum or a minimum? It has a maximum value. So the maximum value is at y is equal to 0. Then the axis of symmetry is the same for all parabolas, and that would be x is equal to 0, or the the y-axis. All right, number 1b. Okay, y is equal to 4x squared. Okay, so I draw my table, I get the values 4, 0, and 4, and then I plot them at negative 1 and 4, 0, 0, and 1, 4. Draw a smooth curve, write down my equation, write down the coordinate of the intercept. Then I do the domain, which is always the same. X is an element of real numbers, or x is from negative infinity to infinity. The range in this case, remember I start walking at negative infinity, but there's no graph there. But as soon as I get to 0, there's a graph, and up to infinity there'll be a graph. So it's going to be for the range, y is an element of 0 included to infinity. This graph has a minimum value, and the minimum value is at y is equal to 0. The axis of symmetry is the same as for all the parabolas in grade 10, the line x is equal to 0 or the y-axis. Please remember that, just study it. That's going to be the axis of symmetry for all parabolas in grade 10. Okay, next, number C, y is equal to negative 2x squared. Okay, so I get all my y values by substituting in brackets in the place of x, and I plot them at negative 2, negative 8, negative 1, negative 2, 0, 0, 1, negative 2, and 2, negative 8. I draw a smooth curve, write down the coordinate of the intercept, write down the equation, and also remember the arrows to show that it goes on forever. The domain is the same for all parabolas, and that's x is an element of real numbers. The other way to write it is x is an element from negative infinity to infinity. Okay, then the y, the range, all the y values that are included in the graph is from negative infinity. That will be included because these arms go on and on and on, downwards up to infinity, negative infinity. So negative infinity will be included and up to 0, and just above 0 it will be excluded again. So it will be y is an element of negative infinity to 0. That's the range. Then the maximum will be at 0. Y is equal to 0. This graph has a maximum, not a minimum. And then the axis of symmetry is the same as for all of them, and that is the y-axis or the line x is equal to 0. All right. And that is it for today. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact your teacher.